Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You have found the dark oak.
On today's episode, we discuss the conviction and later exoneration of Lindy Chamberlain due to the mysterious death of her 9-week-old baby Azaria.
Welcome to the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month through our charity called the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of earnings from our Patreon and sponsors to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. To find out how you can be part of the movement, head over to thedarkoak.com or stay with us until the end of the episode and we will give you all the details.
Even if you are not familiar with today's case, there is a line from a movie that you probably have not seen, said by the incomparable Meryl Streep, that you probably will recognize. A dingo's got my baby. Have you ever heard that?
You've got to say it with the accent.
So I'm not good at Australian accents, so here's my best shot. A dingo's got my baby.
Got my baby.
I think that's actually some really butchered British accent.
I think so too. They're kind of related though, right?
We try. Are they? Girl, geography is not my thing. You know that. Last episode, I had to be like, is that really a word?
Well, geographically, I don't think they're the same. But since Australia was colonized by cast-off British, it's similar. But you're right, different.
Look at her making me look dumb with all of her smartness.
With all of her smartness. You did that all on your own.
We each have our gifts, and what countries colonized others is not mine.
Well, I have to tell you, I don't know anything about this case, to be frank. And when you told me you were covering this case, I had never heard of Lindy Chamberlain, and maybe that makes me a terrible true crime follower. But as soon as you said the dingo, I knew exactly what you were talking about, but I just thought it came from this movie.
Well, and I think a lot of people do, because maybe people like our age, because this story happened in 1980. I was born in 1982. So obviously we were too young at the time to know anything about it. But it's really been thrown around a lot in pop culture for decades, obviously.
Yeah. So I'm curious to really get to the bottom of how this happened, and actually I'm a little terrified because if a dingo's got my baby is genuinely the line from this story, I feel like it's going to be a rough one.
It's not good. So, just be warned. I mean, it's a true crime mystery podcast. Like, we talk about a lot of unsavory things here, but we are talking about a 9-week-old infant that, lost their life in a gruesome way. No matter what, no matter how this baby died, it was pretty awful. So it's going to be a bit of a rough one.
All right, I'll take a deep breath now.
Okay. Well, that line, a dingo's got my baby, unfortunately has been thrown around in pop culture for decades. Shows like Seinfeld, The Simpsons, Frasier, and many, many more different types of shows reference those infamous words and use them as a punchline, quite frankly. And I don't know. I guess because I did know the origin, I don't think it's very funny. But I understand why people who don't know the story from which it originated, may not understand what a tragedy it really represents. So let me fill you in and tell you the story of Lindy and Azaria Chamberlain. Azaria Chantel Lauren Chamberlain. What a pretty name.
I love it.
Right? Was born on June 11th, 1980 to Michael and Lindy Chamberlain. Michael was a minister of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which at that time was a denomination that was not really well understood in their particular area of the world, which was Australia. The couple had been married for 10 years, and after the birth of their only daughter, Azaria, they decided to take her and her 2 older brothers, who were 4 and 6, on a several-day camping and hiking trip. On August 13th, 1980, when Azaria was only 9 weeks old, the Chamberlain family left their home for a camping trip to Ayers Rock, which is a stone mountain that rises 348 meters high above the ground in southwestern Northern Territory, Central Australia. This stone is the world's largest monolith, and in case you didn't know what a monolith is, which I know Stephanie does, but
Oh, come
I
on.
had to Google it. A monolith is a very large single stone that is usually really tall and narrow. And this particular stone is called Uluru by the natives.
Oh,
Now, this landmark attracts a lot of tourists because it is so incredible to look at. It's actually one of Australia's most famous places to visit. And you really should look up pictures of it because, I mean, it's incredible.
I'm going to.
As the sun moves throughout the day, it changes color from shades of red and gold. It's beautiful. Late on August 16th, the Chamberlain family arrived at the Ayers Rock campground, and the next day was spent climbing rocks and exploring caves, which just sounds amazing to me.
Yeah. Also, what rock star parents? 6-year-old, 4-year-old, 9-week-old.
And they're attempting a huge family vacation, like out in the wilderness with a 9-week-old. I mean, I don't even think I left the house to go to the store with a 9-week-old, let alone 2 preschoolers, quite
But
frankly.
most of our listeners know we're both boy moms. And I will
Yes.
tell you, I bet the 4 and 6-year-olds were probably harder to take care of than the 9-week-old, all things considered. But by all 3 of them combined, they must have used a lot of teamwork, like power parents.
Oh, they had to be. Well, and the thing with the 9-week-old is they're like hiking. So they're obviously doing this, I'm assuming, with like a pack on their back
Oh,
or carrying this
right.
baby somehow. Like that's,
Right.
well, it's not a vacation for me. I love to be outside, but carrying an infant while I'm hiking does not a vacation make for me personally.
Well, my husband and I actually have terms for that. If it's just the 2 of us, we're going on a vacation. If it's the whole family, we're going on a family trip. It helps set expectations.
Truer words have never been spoken. That is absolutely a perfect way to describe it. Well, sadly, among all of the beautiful memories that were probably made on this day during this trip, the very last photo of Azaria that was ever taken was also taken on this day. And if you Google Azaria, this is the photo that will come up. And it depicts Lindy standing on the side of a rock, and she's holding baby Azaria in a way that looks like the baby's standing. And in the background of this photo, you can see what appears to be a very vast desert plain behind them. So they are out in the middle of nowhere. But this picture really is so heartbreaking to look at and know that these were her last hours on this earth.
Wow.
Now, this is Australia, so we know that joke that everything in Australia is trying to kill you, right?
Yeah.
But all jokes aside, there really is a lot of wildlife in this area. Everything from red kangaroos, which sound cute, but kangaroos are pretty scary little creatures. I say little.
Yeah,
they're
big
like men.
creatures. Yes.
Full-grown, muscle-bound men.
I've seen like the videos where they're like jacked.
They're terrifying.
Yes.
Up close. They are not the Kanga and Roo of my Winnie the Pooh
Oh,
childhood.
but I want them to be so badly.
Oh, they are not. There's also the rare rufous hair wallaby.
Oh, I didn't realize those were dangerous. They're so cute.
I don't know that they're dangerous. They're just out there. I'm just telling you the different types of animals that are in this area.
Okay.
There's lizards and skinks and snakes. One particular snake is the death adder. And Stephanie was just telling me yesterday about having to catch snakes by hand to keep them from hurting her chickens. And so I wanted to ask you, Stephanie, would you want to catch a snake called a death adder?
I was going to say that makes rat snakes seem really innocent. And that's mostly what we collect is pine snakes and rat snakes. I probably would not reach in my hand. Well, you know what? I don't know. I would do a lot to save a chicken. Death adder definitely would make me at least think twice about it. I might put on a glove beforehand.
Good to know. Good to know. Just the idea that she touches rat snakes was enough for me to be like, ooh, I'm not getting chickens.
Well, the last one we caught was only 4.5 feet, so you're good.
Okay, just my height.
You should feel safe around here.
Well, speaking of birds, there were also large birds of prey, such as falcons and buzzards. And there was also an overpopulation of wild dingoes in this area.
Dingoes.
Now, for anyone who does not know what a dingo is a wild dog. And here in the U.S., we don't have dingoes. Stephanie and I are in Florida. But we do have coyotes, actually in every U.S. state except for Hawaii. And so I was just kind of curious to familiarize myself, like, how does a dingo compare to a coyote.
Okay, that makes sense.
They're pretty similar. Dingoes are an apex predator, and this means that they do not have any natural predators. They may occasionally be eaten by a crocodile or killed by another dingo, or possibly be shot at by a farmer or a rancher, but otherwise, they are pretty hardy. They're going to be the survivor.
Okay.
They are mainly opportunistic hunters with a largely carnivorous diet that consists of other Australian mammals like kangaroos. They eat those kangaroos, wallabies, wombats, but they will also eat plants and fruits on occasion. So they're pretty much going to eat anything and everything that they can find. And they're very, very abundant in this area, as I mentioned. In fact, there were so many of them that there was a plan in place to quietly exterminate some of them because they were so overpopulated here at Ayers Rock that they were becoming a bit of a nuisance.
Well, and it can be harmful to the population if there are too many of them
Right.
as well.
The other animals, exactly.
Now, can I ask you, do dingoes like howl or something like coyotes do? Is that like a thing?
Good question, Stephanie. Yes, dingoes do howl, especially at night, to communicate with their other pack members and to help keep intruders away.
Okay. See, the howling is the part that gets me. I know we have a lot of coyotes out at our homestead, and we've had to really lock down all of our birds. So the turkeys, chickens, ducks, quail, all of them get locked up. And we had to put up a electric fence around our little piggies to protect them not only from the coyotes, but also from the bears. But I will tell you, it will send chills down your spine when you hear a pack of coyotes howling, like from your backyard.
And we have coyotes. I'm a little more in the city, and I know we have coyotes because we see them, but I don't hear them like you do here. The dingoes howl. I don't know what a coyote sounds like, but a dingo's howl is described as being very wolf-like. So I assume they're probably all kind of the same sound.
Yeah, but I imagine, camping out at Ayers Rock with dingoes howling around you is a little unnerving.
I can imagine that it would be. And when I say that there was a lot of dingoes, get this. It was estimated that there were between 30 and 45 hybrid or purebred dingoes just in the camping area alone.
Wow.
That's
okay.
a lot.
That's a lot of dingoes.
Of wild dogs howling. Talk about creepy.
Yeah.
They were everywhere. In fact, while the Chamberlain family was out hiking and exploring caves, at one point, Lindy looked up and saw a dingo staring at her from on top of a nearby rock.
Ooh, yikes.
Now, in the evenings, the campers at Ayers Rock would often gather around the barbecue area. There was like a central barbecue area to socialize with the other campers. And on the evening of August 17th, that's exactly what the Chamberlain family was doing. And it worked out really nicely because there was another couple vacationing, a woman named Sally Lowe and her husband, and they had an infant daughter. And Lindy and Sally really hit it off. So the two families were able to enjoy their dinner meals together. And throughout the dinner hour, campers would spot dingoes running around the different tents and sometimes even following them as they disposed of their leftover food, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, this is where the crossover between wildlife and human life gets... Somebody's going to get hurt, either a dingo or a person.
Right. And that's what the people who'd wanted to exterminate, that's what they were saying. They were saying, it's just a matter of time till something bad happens.
Exactly.
But there were delays and they had the guns, but they didn't have the bullets yet. And since there hadn't really been any real threat at this point, it wasn't like we have to take care of this immediately.
Sure.
But I do think it's interesting that the plans were in the works to help thin out this population.
Somebody saw it for what it was.
Exactly. Now, again, we've already talked about there's quite a lot of these dingoes in the camping area, but just in the barbecue area alone, it was estimated there were about a dozen that just like to hang out right there. So again,
probably that opportunistic eating by the trash cans, maybe something's going to fall on the ground, and they've probably lost their fear of humans at that point.
Well, yes, and here's a situation that doesn't help. At one point, a dingo got so close to the camp, Michael threw a crust of bread at it.
Oh, no.
So that's
And you do it just not thinking about the consequences, not to any way like point a finger or blame, but we have constant issues with that here in Florida with the alligators.
Mm-hmm.
Constant issues with people feeding the alligators, and then inevitably something bad happens. And sometimes it's a person getting bit. More than not, it's the alligator becoming aggressive and then having to be relocated or possibly even euthanized.
Right, right. Because what happens is these wild animals start to associate humans with food.
Right.
So a very, very bad idea. Please don't ever feed wild animals in scenarios like this. And Lindy even warned her husband to not tease the dogs. And right as she was giving him this advice, the dingo that they just fed attacked a mouse that just happened to be scurrying by. So
Whoa.
again, really, they're hungry. They're hungry little hunters.
Especially if they're overpopulated, it could have certainly meant that there wasn't enough resources around for all of them too.
As the evening went on, Lindy decided it was time to put baby Azaria and then little Reagan, her little 4-year-old brother, to bed in the tent. Azaria was dressed in a diaper or a nappy, singlet, and here in the US we call them onesies, some booties, a little jumpsuit, and a matinee jacket, because here in August it's hot, but over there we're coming out of the winter months, so it's a little cooler. And a matinee jacket is a short knitted cardigan type jacket, just like a little sweater. So Lindy left the group of fellow campers for about 10 minutes, and when she returned, she announced that both of the children were asleep. After just a couple of minutes had passed, some campers heard what they believed sounded like a baby cry. So Lindy went to check on the kids. And that's when the otherwise peaceful night was interrupted by Lindy's frantic scream, "The dingoes got my baby."
Oh.
Now, Sally would later describe Lindy's scream as the most heart-wrenching sound she'd ever heard. Lindy said as she approached the tent, she saw a dingo running out of it. And it looked like it might have been carrying something in its mouth, but it was so dark that she wasn't really positive as to what she was seeing. And please keep in mind, we are out in the middle of nowhere. So when we say dark, it's dark.
Right.
Now, as Lindy entered the tent, she saw little Reagan asleep, but 2-month-old Azaria was nowhere to be found. At that moment, Lindy suddenly remembered seeing the dingo staring at her earlier in the day while she was holding Azaria.
Stalking her.
Exactly. She said she suddenly realized the dingo was casing her baby.
It's very possible.
In a full-blown panic, Lindy chased the dingo as far as she could, but again had to give up when the dog disappeared into the black wilderness, which at first I was like, why would you ever give up? But again, when I take into consideration, it's pitch black. Like she can't just, she has no idea where she's going. She can't see anything anyway. Like she was really pretty helpless.
And that dingo knows where he's going. She doesn't know.
Exactly. Now, Ayers Rock is at least 5 hours away in every direction from any big town. So when someone goes missing or gets hurt in this area, the resources available to them, specifically in the way of like experienced police
Sure.
or such, were very, very limited.
Like actual search crews.
Right. So from here on out, I believe that really came into play in this case. When law enforcement did arrive, they were immediately focused on finding Azaria, which of course seems like it should be the first priority. However, what it did for the investigation was it really stopped witnesses from being interviewed, like at that very moment, and the scene probably was not adequately processed. Sally Lowe, who'd spent the evening with the Chamberlain family, I mean, she was literally the one who cared for the other Chamberlain children once this incident happened and all the chaos was going on.
Right.
She said she was never contacted by the police after giving her initial eyewitness account. In a later interview, she would say that if another half hour had gone by, she believes that her own baby would have been taken by a dingo because at this point, the animals had found an easy food source.
This is horrendous.
Horrendous. Now, everyone quickly pitched in to help find baby Azaria. Obviously, there's no time to lose. Approximately 300 men, women, and teenagers formed a human chain to search for the missing baby or any piece of evidence such as clothing or paw prints. There was also an indigenous group that lived nearby in this area and they
Yeah.
joined in. And
Okay.
they were especially good at like tracking and they'd learned to coexist with these animals.
They probably knew a lot of the trails and a lot of the dens and things like that.
Correct, correct. Now, when Michael and Lindy looked inside their tent and saw the amount of blood on the floor and the blankets, they almost immediately accepted the fact that their daughter was dead.
Well, yeah, she's only 9 weeks old.
9 weeks old, yes. But it didn't help that Michael was overheard telling other campers that he believed his daughter to be dead.
I can see him saying that just in like shock, like my baby's dead. My baby's dead. You know what I'm saying? I
Yes.
can see just it's just free thinking.
Right,
You
right.
know?
But authorities found it just a little unsettling that he was so quick to jump to that as opposed to like holding out for hope.
I ugh, I guess so. I mean, a 9 week old. What are the chances?
I don't think they were very good at all, at all. In fact, that was one of the things Lindy and Michael said. They said they believed that Azaria was dead before she even left the tent, quite frankly. Get this is heart wrenching. Little Aiden was seen crying to one of the nearby campers, and he was saying that the dingo has our baby in its tummy.
And this is the 6-year-old brother.
Yeah, little 6-year-old Aiden.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, horrific, horrific.
Yeah, that's brutal.
There were paw prints leading away from the tent entrance, but the prints disappeared as they grew further away from the campsite. And several other sets of dingo tracks were found, but there were no pieces of clothing or any other evidence that Azaria had in fact been taken by a wild dog, except for one small depression in the sand that looked as if a dingo had possibly laid something down. This spot was further investigated, and it did appear that the imprint in the sand was made by some type of knitted weave material because the knit pattern was actually visible in the sand.
Oh wow.
But unfortunately, there were no visible dingo tracks leading away from this depression, so they had no idea which direction it may have headed.
Right.
Now, almost immediately, as you can imagine, this case took on a mind of its own. You have an infant missing, which of course pulls people in, but then you also have a mother saying that her baby was eaten by a wild dog, which at the time, despite this heavy dingo population, seemed absolutely absurd. And even now, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. I mean, we definitely know it's possible, but it's just so awful that it doesn't seem like it could be real.
I don't know. I mean, we did cover in the Casey Hathaway case how incredible it was that he felt like a bear had saved him. But at the end of that case, I really do talk about all the cautionary tales of the tale as old as time is people are out normally berry picking was the typical situation, and people lost babies and toddlers to bears. So it's not unfathomable. I mean, it's again horrendous, but nature.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's an awful thought. Like ugh, it's really awful for me to think about. Right off the bat, a lot of people had a hard time believing Lindy, and some outright just called her a liar. One of the investigators who,
Even with the paw prints leading out of the tent.
yep,
Wow. Okay. Was she not very likable?
I think I go into it in a little bit about she does have a very certain type of like stoicness, I would say. I don't know. I
I
just
mean, it
think
seems like there has to be more than them just kind of getting the defeatist attitude of like, oh my gosh, we've just lost our baby. Our baby is probably dead. Seems like there should be more than that, especially with all this evidence of some kind of knitted material being laid down and footprints and again, unless she has something else in her past that I don't know about, or she's extremely odd, because we've always talked about the court of public opinion, how sometimes even if you aren't guilty, if you're unlikable, people want to view you as guilty. So it does seem strange that they would jump to the conclusion that she was lying.
I think it seems perfectly reasonable that in this scenario, a dingo carried this baby off. And I truly don't know the why so early on people thought she was lying,
I mean,
but they did.
it's unusual that that would happen. Thank goodness.
Right.
I mean, thank goodness.
Right.
This is not something that happens normally. And so maybe it's was just that hard for them to wrap their heads around, that it was just, you don't want to think it's even possible. But also a mother killing her baby or doing something to hurt her baby is awful as well.
Truly, truly. And unfortunately, that is more common
Right.
for, infanticide. Unfortunately, I've heard many stories about that, as opposed to this is the only one I've heard of a baby potentially being killed by a dingo.
By a dingo, right.
So I kind of feel like that might play into it a little bit. Just the fact that there had been such a history with these animals and nothing like this had ever happened before to our knowledge. So I just think I have to think that's part of how people came to this conclusion.
Wow.
Now, one of the investigators who did believe Lindy brought up the fact that there had been several recent documented attacks on humans by dingoes in the area, including, and get this, a little 3-year-old girl being pulled out of the backseat of her car a week or two prior to Azaria's disappearance.
What?
And the only thing that stopped that little girl from being carried away was her father just happened to be right there and was able to chase the dingo and grab her out of the mouth. But
What?
otherwise, who knows what would have happened in that scenario? So that for me right there is enough to be like,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
That's it.
Like,
it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. But the skeptic said that because none of these other previously reported attacks resulted in death, obviously Lindy was lying. Now, I've already warned you that due to the fact that they were out in the middle of nowhere, law enforcement left something to be desired. And for example, here's just one of the experiments performed by one such investigator.
Oh, boy.
So this particular person believed it would be impossible for a dog to carry a 10-pound baby for hundreds of yards. So he collected a 10-pound bucket of sand, which he then tried to carry in his own mouth.
What?
And when he couldn't carry it for more than a minute, he challenged the other officers to try to carry it. And when they couldn't, he said, "See, it's impossible."
What?
That is so, talk about absurd. That is so ridiculous and absurd to me.
What relevance does it have to anything?
Well, if he can't carry a 10-pound baby in his mouth, how could a dog? I mean,
these are okay. These are very skilled carnivores.
Right. I mean, it's so ridiculous to me that it's like I don't even have an argument for it. It's just that's dumb. Like that's dumb.
That's just dumb. Yes.
Now, throughout the investigation, dingoes in the area were hunted and killed and then dissected by veterinarians to see if their stomachs contained human bone, protein, fibers from clothing, anything.
Again, this part makes me sad too. Just don't feed the dingoes.
It makes me sad, but we do know that they were already going to be thinned out. So, there was already a problem.
And again, I know there's population control and it keeps everyone healthy, but it still makes me sad.
It does. Because they're just being dingoes, quite frankly.
Right.
And honestly, who was there first?
Dingoes be dingoing.
Probably the dingoes be dingoing. That sounds like a t-shirt slogan.
But sorry if that sounded callous. I hate the story and I hate that this happened to this little baby. But again, a dingo is just an animal. He didn't do it out of malice.
They're just being what they are. They're just they're just being an animal, and here's an easy food source. Like It's disgusting to think about, but it's true.
Right.
And despite all of these dissections and looking for this material to prove that Azaria had in fact been taken by one of these dogs, nothing of note was found during any of the examinations of the exterminated animals. Now, 1 week after Azaria disappeared, a man named Wally Goodwin was hiking at the base of Ayers Rock when he came across torn and bloodied clothing on the ground.
Oh, no.
It was the jumpsuit, booties, diaper, and onesie that Azaria had been wearing when she disappeared.
Oh, that's awful.
It's awful. Notably, her matinee jacket was missing. Now, this clothing was tested, and the findings were very interesting. There was no dog saliva on the clothing.
What?
Although the clothing and the inside of the tent were covered in cat hair. The onesie was inside the jumpsuit, but the onesie was inside out. And Lindy was adamant that she did not put that onesie on Azaria inside out, that she would never have done that because she was very particular about how she dressed her babies. Now, the fact that the matinee jacket was never found was a big deal. It would explain why there was no dog saliva on any of the other clothing, right?
Yeah, okay, I get that.
But the fact that it was not found with the rest of the clothing made investigators wonder if perhaps no such matinee jacket ever existed, and Lindy was just saying that there was a matinee jacket as a excuse as to why there was no dog saliva found.
So now this has gone to like a total premeditated, extermination of her daughter?
Yes, I guess. And I will say it is interesting that everything was found together except for the matinee jacket, and there's no saliva on anything except it makes sense that it would have been on the jacket, right? But this jacket can't be found. I mean, I kind of see where they're going there.
Maybe the dingo ate it.
Maybe. Now, during examination, it was determined that the tears and rips on Azaria's clothing were actually not caused by an animal's teeth, but instead by a sharp object such as scissors.
Oh, how do they determine that?
Now, given the fact that the clothing was very near to where the Chamberlains had been hiking earlier in the day, investigators wondered if perhaps the clothing had been planted, and this made them think that it may have been possible that Azaria had actually gone missing much earlier in the day, and perhaps all night long Lindy had just been holding like a bundle to look like a dummy baby, and she'd just been cradling, this bundle of something so that she wouldn't raise suspicion with all the other campers.
Okay. I will say, you've got me kind of really thinking now with the tears in the clothing not being from an animal.
The finding was that the tears from the clothing were not from an animal.
Okay.
Let's see where this goes. In October, the Chamberlain car was searched, and this is when things got really bad for the Chamberlain family. When tested, the car lit up positive for fetal blood in 22 places, including a large spray of blood under the glove box. Now, fetal blood is found in infants under 6 months of age only. So that's the only population who has this fetal blood. So this could not have been blood from one of the older boys. It wasn't a nosebleed or an injury from, one of them. This had to be Azaria's blood. And a significant amount could only mean one thing. Police believed that when Lindy said she was taking the children to put them down for the evening, she'd actually taken Azaria to the family car where she laid her on the front seat and then used scissors to cut Azaria's throat. And in several reports, the word decapitation was used.
Whoa.
A large spray of blood from this wound, then sprayed under the glove box. After killing Azaria, it was believed that Lindy hid the baby's body in a large camera case before returning to the group of campers, and then she sat around the campfire and fed Aiden a can of baked beans.
Oh, that's sinister.
A few minutes later, when someone supposedly heard this baby cry, Lindy went back to the tent, saying she was going to go check on her infant daughter, and that's when everyone heard her screaming, "A dingo has my baby." Investigators believed that while everyone else was then preoccupied with searching for Azaria, Lindy disposed of her daughter's body. Now, despite investigator suspicions, on February 20th, 1981, Alice Springs coroner Dennis Barrett found that a wild dog or dingo took Azaria and that no member of the Chamberlain family was responsible for her death. However, the last paragraph in his findings was very strange, and to this day, I don't know where this came from. He found that a person or persons unknown took the baby's body from the dingo after the attack and then disposed of the body. And this, obviously, left room for further prosecution.
What does that even mean?
I don't know. I don't know where he came up with it. I don't know why someone would take a child that had been killed by a dog and instead of saying, here's the body of this child.
Let me find your family.
Right. Or, you know,
Give it a
anything
proper burial.
correct
Anything normal.
would be like, oh, I'm now going to dispose of this. That makes no sense to me, but that was his finding.
Okay.
And because investigators couldn't just let people be running around disposing of bodies,
Right.
they obviously had to keep looking into this. So during the next several months, the Chamberlains' home would be raided. The first inquest would be quashed and a new one was ordered. And on February 2nd, 1982, coroner Jerry Galvin committed Lindy Chamberlain to trial on the charge of murdering Azaria, and Michael was charged as an accessory after the fact.
Well, this fetal blood thing is concerning.
The fetal blood is very concerning. The saliva or lack thereof was
Did
very
she by
concerning.
any chance, like, give birth in a car or anything like that?
To my knowledge, she did not.
Okay. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of any reason why there would legitimately be a lot of blood in your car.
Well, I may have a reason for you.
Okay.
Hold tight. Hold tight. The trial began in September of that same year, 1982, and the defense brought in several of the fellow campers whose eyewitness accounts confirmed that Lindy was telling the truth. A nurse who was at the campsite reported hearing Azaria cry after the time when the prosecution alleged Lindy had already killed her.
Okay, so she wasn't just holding a bundle of something.
This nurse heard a baby cry. Investigators say impossible, the baby's already dead, and that was that.
Okay.
All right, I know you're worried about this blood.
Yes,
Okay.
I am, because that's concerning.
It was very concerning. Defense believed it was highly unlikely that such a crime could be committed and then cleaned up to the extent that it was.
So quickly, too.
Exactly. And when Sally, remember Sally, was interviewed by authorities, she sat in the front seat of this car where Azaria had allegedly been killed just moments before. There was not a single drop of blood to be found.
And the car wasn't, like, wet from being wiped down or cleaned or anything like that.
No. So the defense really decided there has to be some other kind of reason that makes sense. So they really got to work. So it turns out there's like this copper dust that kind of just exists in this part of the world, just kind of out in the air.
Okay, in Australia.
In Australia, yep. And this dust tests positive as fetal blood. And then remember that blood splatter under the glove box?
How could I forget it?
Okay. That same splatter was on several other vehicles of the same year, make, and model. It was not blood. It was a type of paint overspray. And when it was mixed with this dust that just was out in the air, it lit up positive as fetal blood. There are several other organic compounds that can test positive as fetal blood, including mucus from the nose and chocolate milkshakes.
So how effective is this test then?
Well, I don't know, but I can tell you that mucus from the nose and chocolate milkshakes both had been present in the Chamberlain car.
I imagine so.
I can also tell you they are both present in my car. I'm sure of it. And to answer your question, these tests that investigators had used were later proven to be highly unreliable.
Oh, beautiful.
Yes. Remember that cat hair that was all over the tent?
Yes.
And the clothing?
Yes.
A hair expert, an animal hair expert, re-examined this hair. Now, he didn't take a look at this until like 30 years after the fact. So this was well after her exoneration. He concluded this was 100% dingo hair.
How did they suspect it was cat hair then, I wonder?
I don't know if it was the 80s of it all. I really don't know. He said if they had let me look at this evidence, all these years ago, I would have told him right off the bat, this is absolutely dingo hair. He literally wrote the book on it. He literally wrote books on it.
Oh, wow.
And he said that there was no way he was wrong. It was so obvious. He said it was like apples to oranges, cat hair to dingo hair. This was clearly dingo hair. Now, looking back, Lindy's case is often used as an example of how media and bias can adversely affect a trial. You mentioned that earlier, the court of public opinion.
Yeah.
And Lindy's behavior was picked apart as she did not look or act how the public believed a typical grieving mother should look or behave.
Probably in shock.
She has a right to be, right?
First of all, losing her baby and then being accused of murdering her.
Exactly. Just who knows what the right way to behave is in that scenario.
No.
But both her and Michael did appear very stoic. Even, like I said earlier, immediately after the incident, they seemed very stoic. Again, shock, I'm sure. But as an outsider looking in, people didn't like it. Lindy always spoke very matter-of-factly about really hard things. Azaria's jumpsuit had been relatively undamaged except for those small cuts and tears, which I do not believe were from scissors. I mean, I just think it's clear those were probably dog teeth, and some expert believe them to be from scissors.
Right.
But there was that really large blood stain around the neck. And in an interview, which Michael and Lindy gave several of, which was another thing the public didn't like, but during one of these interviews, Lindy was asked if she was surprised to see the clothing still in one piece if Azaria had been attacked by a dog. And Lindy responded, completely calm and collected, saying, quote, "No, not after seeing a dingo eat cattle. They use their paws like hands and peel the skin back, like the peeling the skin off of an orange." End quote.
Okay.
The public did not appreciate seeing a mother talk about something so disturbing in regards to the death of her own baby.
This is awful.
Remember earlier when I mentioned that the onesie was found inside out?
Yeah.
The way they eat could explain that.
Well, I was going to say if they pull her out of it, it would just kind of automatically invert.
Yeah.
As it came off of her.
Now, throughout the trial, Lindy was always dressed very stylishly. And again, this did not fit the picture that one might conjure up when imagining a woman whose baby had been killed and, quite frankly, eaten by a wild dog. And it didn't help that Lindy was heavily pregnant at the time of her trial. It was actually viewed as her making fun of the legal system and the whole process. People thought she was saying, I killed my first daughter and now I'm having another one. Ha, 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 ha.
People are just making stuff up in their heads, though.
They just didn't like her.
They just didn't
They
like
just
her.
didn't like
And
her.
what she said in that interview, a particular interview, was pretty darn callous, in my opinion. But I still don't see, especially now that all these, quote, tests and expert opinions have come back to not be correct. I do feel like it's a bit of a witch hunt.
I will say this. I've watched many interviews of Lindy, both at the time and also like in more recent years. She's very, very strong. She's obviously persevered, and she comes across as very stoic, very matter of fact. I really feel like I was not taken aback by what she said here about their eating habits. I mean, the idea of it is disturbing, but I feel like it's almost literally just like her personality, just to be like,
very matter of fact.
Yeah, here is why. Here, you asked me a question. Why is her onesie in one piece?
Yeah.
Well, here's why.
Yeah.
Now, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, the Chamberlains were Seventh-day Adventist. And again, at the time, that was not a really popular religion in Australia. So because people didn't understand it, what do we do when we don't understand something?
Oh, yeah.
We just make stuff up. So they were really quick to accuse the Chamberlains of being part of a cult. And obviously, they required the sacrificing of infants.
Naturally.
Now, in reality, the family did openly express that they found a lot of peace in their faith. They did not hide that. But as a person of faith, obviously...
That's not alarming.
Right. But to hear parents say, we found peace with the death of our daughter, or things of that nature, again, bothered people.
People just didn't like it.
People just didn't like it. An anonymous tip was received saying that the name Azaria means sacrifice in the wilderness. But in reality, it's actually a Hebrew name and it means helped by God. So there's that.
Come on, folks. Come on.
This one's interesting to me. Lindy was accused of being a witch after neighbors and supposed friends of the family said that Lindy only ever dressed Azaria in black. And all I can say is if wearing black makes you a witch, where's my broomstick? I will also add that in the early 1980s, black and navy dresses were actually very much in fashion for little girls.
Right.
Now, during the trial, Les Harris, who was an engineer who had been studying dingoes for over a decade, stated that a dingo's teeth can shear through material as tough as a seatbelt. So he believed the rips and tears through Azaria's clothing were very much consistent with the dingo attack. And given all of the other evidence, I have to agree with that. He also cited an example of a captive dingo removing and devouring a bundle of meat from its wrapping paper while not damaging the paper at all.
Whoa.
Again, kind of goes back to their eating style, and it could explain some of the findings in this case.
I don't want to think about it.
He also provided evidence to show that a dingo was able to carry something as heavy as a kangaroo.
Unbelievable.
I can't believe that he was able to prove that when this officer couldn't hold a bucket in his mouth. He also cited the report of the 3-year-old little girl being grabbed out of the back seat of her car in that very same camping area just a couple weeks before Azaria went missing.
Exactly.
On October 29th, 1982, Lindy was found guilty, and she was sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor.
Whoa, okay.
At the time of her sentencing, she was 8 months pregnant.
Wow, they really did not like her.
They did not like her. Her husband, Michael, was found guilty as an accessory after the fact, and he was given an 18-month suspended sentence. Less than a month later, Lindy gave birth to her second daughter, Kalia. Now, while she was pregnant in prison, Lindy was aware that as soon as the baby was born, she was going to be taken away from her.
It's horrible.
Horrible. So she really tried really hard to keep the baby inside as long as possible because she said, as long as I'm pregnant, you're still mine.
Right.
But as soon as I give birth to you, I'm going to lose you. And Lindy was correct. Kalia was taken away from Lindy less than an hour after her birth, and she spent the first 3 years of her life being raised by foster families.
Oh, so not even her dad?
No. And I don't really know the why. I don't know the why she was with foster families. I assume just because he'd also been found guilty and there was no mom around.
Right.
And just all of these things.
Right.
I will tell you that for me, the idea of having my baby unwillingly taken from me immediately after birth is right up there with losing her 9-week-old. I mean, she literally lost 2 children.
Trauma on top of trauma.
Not to mention the 2 older ones that are home that she also lost. Like, it's just, she literally lost all 4 of her children.
Yes. It actually does remind me a lot of the Kathleen Fulbig case, which there's a lot of similarities. I mean, Australian, having lost multiple children, and we'll see how this ends, but, being exonerated as well.
Yeah.
Being convicted of a crime that they may not have committed.
Right. It's just, if she did not kill her daughter, wow. What a unfair shake, Just
Sure.
awful.
Sure.
Now, the Chamberlains obviously appealed the guilty verdicts, but were unsuccessful. And during the next several years, there would be applications for release for things such as when Reagan suffered an accident that affected his eye, or Kalia was transferred to a new foster family. But all of these requests were denied. But in January 1986, something would happen that would change everything. 6 years after Azaria went missing, an English tourist by the name of David Brett was climbing Uluru, and he fell to his death. And the area where he fell was full of dingo lairs. So to give you an idea of what type of landscape we're looking at here, it took searchers 8 days to get to his body.
Oh, boy.
But when they were combing the area looking for David, searchers made an incredible discovery. An infant's matinee jacket.
No.
And get this. I have tingles just thinking about it. The man who found it, you find this, you're out in the middle of nowhere. It's obviously been here for a while. It would have been really easy to overlook, right?
Sure.
If you didn't know the importance. The man who found it immediately knew what it was and how important it was, because out of all of the searchers who were out looking for David, he was the only one who'd also participated in the search for Azaria.
Wow.
So I just think somebody was looking out
Seriously.
that he was the one who found that.
Wow.
Now, obviously, this jacket was shown to Lindy, and she was able to positively identify it as Azaria's. And after nearly 6 years, there was proof that Lindy had not lied. Upon this discovery, the chief minister of the Northern Territory ordered that Lindy Chamberlain be immediately released and that the case be reopened. Now, despite being released, it was not until September 15th, 1988, that the Northern Territory Court of Criminal Appeals unanimously overturned all of the convictions
So 2
against
years
Lindy.
later.
Yeah. And keep in mind, Lindy had spent 3 years in prison. Once Lindy was released, Kalia was reunited with her biological family.
Wow.
A movie called A Cry in the Dark, released in 1988, starring Meryl Streep,
Yes.
told the story of Lindy's wrongful conviction. The movie portrayed Lindy as innocent, and it told a very sympathetic side of her story, but it seemed to backfire, and that was when the line, "A dingo has my baby," became such a big joke.
Yeah, it kind of takes the fun out of the joke, doesn't it?
That's why I'm like, this is not funny. But again, if you don't know the story.
Sure. And I certainly have been guilty of saying it over and over, not knowing that it came from a true story.
Right. Now, 2 years after their exoneration, the Chamberlains were awarded $1.3 million in compensation for wrongful imprisonment.
Wow.
But get this, that amount was less than 1/3 of their legal fees.
Oh boy. Wow. So just getting kind of brutalized over and over.
Over and over and over again. On December 13th, 1995, a third coroner's inquest was released stating that the cause and manner of Azaria's death was unknown. It was not until June 2012 that the coroner Elizabeth Morris ruled that a dingo was actually responsible for Azaria's death.
Unknown?
Right? Like, they just couldn't give it to her. They just couldn't say it.
It does seem like that. Like, I'm just going to withhold that.
Right. We're going to let you out. We're going to say that, you were wrongly convicted, but we're not going to confirm your story.
Oh, that's cruel.
Yeah. Morris made this finding in the light of subsequent reports of dingo attacks on humans causing injury and death. So this may have been the first documented attack, but it wasn't the last.
Oh.
And Morris stated that Azaria Chamberlain died at Ayers Rock on the 17th of August, 1980. The cause of her death was as a result of being attacked and taken by a dingo, and a death certificate with the cause of death has been registered. So why am I sharing this case on a podcast that covers unsolved cases? Well, to this day, it's believed that 50% of the public still believe Lindy to be responsible for her daughter's death. They still don't buy it, which is crazy to me because I'm convinced. I think that a dingo definitely killed Azaria that night. But a lot of people disagree with me. So I thought it was worth sharing on an Unsolved Mysteries podcast. We'd love to know what our listeners think. Now, unfortunately, the loss of their daughter, the stress of the trial, and the imprisonment and the public scrutiny really took a toll on this family, as, it would. For a long time, it was believed that Reagan, who again was only 4 when his sister died, had no memory of the evening. He was the little boy who was asleep in the tent. But one day, after the family got a new puppy, Reagan was laying on the floor, and the puppy ran over his back. And he sat up, and Lindy asked him what was going on, and he said, that was just like when the dingo walked on me.
Oh, that is chilling.
Isn't that crazy? When his mom said, but you were asleep. I thought you were asleep when I walked into the tent. He said that he was pretending to be asleep because he thought the dingo was coming back to get him.
Oh, that's awful.
It's awful. Here's a story more awful. Little Aiden, 6-year-old Aiden.
Yeah.
The family didn't realize that for years he blamed himself for his sister's death because he did not zip up the family tent.
Oh, precious.
The tent had a broken zipper. But
Okay.
he didn't know that. So he just didn't zip up the tent, and he, for years, silently blamed himself. And of course, we know it wouldn't have mattered if a
Right.
dingo wanted in, it would
Right.
have gotten in.
Right.
But how awful that this little baby carried that for all those years.
Yes.
Now, sadly, the stress of everything proved to be too much for Michael and Lindy's marriage. And in June of 1991, their divorce was finalized. Both would end up remarrying. Lindy says that her time spent in prison was time on hold. Like her life had been freeze framed, but then she was released and life picked right back up again. She said that throughout the ordeal, she learned to not judge others quickly. She said she learned early on that she was going to be judged no matter how she behaved. If she smiled during the trial, she was accused of belittling her daughter's death. If she cried, she was accused of acting. So she decided she might as well just remain true to herself and follow her own path. And she said, "You have to learn to laugh at yourself, or you will have a pretty miserable life." Now, though many have suggested that Lindy should file lawsuits against the Northern Territory, Lindy speaks only of forgiveness and moving on. She attributes learning to forgive as the only way she was able to travel her journey without bitterness and without incurring the damage in her life that hurt and anger inflict. She also knows that an apology given unwillingly is no apology at all. In the end, she says that the only true form of freedom is the freedom of her mind. And sadly, Michael died suddenly in 2017 from complications of leukemia, but the rest of the family has carried on. And that's the really, really awful, sad story of Lindy and Azaria Chamberlain.
The true story of the dingo.
Really awful.
That is really awful. Thanks, Cynthia. Just ruining a good time.
In case you don't feel bad enough, I can tell you one more thing that's really awful.
I don't know if I can take it.
To this day, Lindy says sometimes when she's out and about, some random stranger will walk past her and they'll howl at her like a dingo.
No. That people.
The real mystery is, how are people so awful and then other people so amazing?
That's
I have
true.
to say, Lindy, I would love to talk to her. I would love to, not about this, because I feel like at this point she's
talked about it enough.
In fact, she probably wouldn't have been difficult to find. And I thought about reaching out to her at the beginning of the case. And I just thought, and most of the time we do, most of the time we try, if we're able to reach out to the family members.
Right.
In this case, I was like, I think she's talked about it enough. I'm going to leave her alone. I don't think it would be healing for her.
Right.
So I'm going to not reach out to her, but I have to say she seems like a really amazing person, and like I said, a survivor, and to not be angry and nasty and all of those things that I certainly would be after this ordeal.
It would be very easy for her to be bitter.
And she would have every right to be, which
Yeah.
of course does her no good, but still she's kind of a rock star. So and so much tragedy. She's also proof that you can survive even without the going to prison and all of that. Just to lose all of her children and her marriage and just all of those things. The fact that she's able to keep going, she's really a testament to what a human can survive.
Yeah, perseverance for sure. Wow. Okay. That's a roughin'.
It's rough.
Well, I'm going to do the branch of hope because I don't know that I can do. This is rough. I remember you kind of telling me about it, just letting you know there's child loss in this one, and I was like, "Oh, it'll be fine," but I've got mixed feelings. This is hard.
In researching this case, I have to say we tend to stay away from the kids' cases a lot of times, and this is one that we just decided we wanted to cover. But as I got really into the research, I was like, ooh, this one's heavy. One's heavy.
Well, I'm glad Lindy's out there kind of living her life, and I hope those other little babies, those little boys, and little Kalia have some peace. They've got a pretty strong mama.
For sure.
That's a good start.
Absolutely.
All right, so branch of hope. Now, most of you know the true stories we tell on this podcast do provide entertainment and excitement, But we always want to show compassion and respect for the victims and their loved ones. And the Branch of Hope Foundation allows us to give back to the community and spread awareness about unsolved cases and hopefully bring a little comfort and hope to those who need it. Each month, we will highlight a nonprofit related to our first episode of the month. This month, our nonprofit is related to our Kendrick Johnson case, which we covered just a few weeks ago. The fund is called the Kendrick Johnson Foundation, and their goal is to definitely shed some more light on Kendrick's case, but also to advocate for safety in schools, particularly in high schools, since that's unfortunately where Kendrick lost his life. So a portion of proceeds from our Patreon and sponsors will go directly to that Kendrick Johnson Foundation. You can get involved by donating directly. Their information can be found on our website or on our social media platforms. You can also contribute by joining our Patreon, where a portion of your subscription will go to support the Branch of Hope Foundation nonprofit organization. So we're simply a podcast leading through words and actions. If you love this episode, love us, or love what we are doing at the Branch of Hope Foundation, please like and subscribe and tell someone. Forward this episode to someone who might like it.
Be sure to follow us to our next episode where we share another compelling mystery case with you. And thanks for listening, Shiver Seekers. You rock.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Crete for our amazing music.